All right, we are live. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. My name is Renata Landrow. I'm with the Office of the Student Advocate, and we appreciate you guys tuning into our conversation today about the importance of inclusive spaces for our transgender youth. I'm going to allow our guest here today to introduce himself, and then we'll get started with our conversation.
Thank you. So my name is Fumi Lyle Solar. I go by Fumi. I am currently an MBA candidate at North Carolina Central University, and I'm also a singer and songwriter.
Thank you, Fumi, for taking the time to join us today. Let's start off with having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your story.
Sure. So I was born in College Park, which is right outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Uh, for the most part, grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina. Um, Anybody who is about HBCUs knows about Aggie Pride. So I really grew up in A&T land. I have an interesting story, a lot of duality. So my father was born in Nigeria, hence my name Fumilayo. And my mother is Black American. Um, let's see. I have a lot of like passion for working with the youth and education and mental health. So yeah. Oh, I forgot I'm a Tar Heel. So I graduated from UNC Chapel Hill. That's important.
Awesome, awesome. So, you brought up mental health. I want you to speak a little bit more about how you feel mental health plays a role in your day to day life.
Yeah, so I think that with anybody, mental health is very important. But when we're talking about transgender and gender nonconforming and non-binary people, particularly youth, mental health is a huge conversation surrounding that. So, for example, just being misgendered. If your teacher is misgendering you, or if your parents are misgendering you, what that can do to your sense of who you are and your mental health. And I don't have any hard statistics right now, but I know that there is a high, um, you know, self harm rate for LGBT youth in general, but transgender youth is a lot higher, and a lot of that has to do with the level of harassment um, that goes about. And I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist or a doctor, but transitioning in my um, mid 20s, like getting on hormonal treatment, I feel like that also can impact how you feel in your mental health with your um, hormonal fluctuations. So I imagine that middle schoolers and high schoolers are already going through puberty. So that's impacting how they're, feeling about themselves. So if you add on this potential, possibly having, hormonal treatment, what is the exact term? Uh, it's HRT, human replacement therapy, or treatment. I should know this, but because I was on it. But basically, say for example, I'm a transgender man. I was female assigned at birth, had female hormones, as we would say, female hormones. So I got on male hormones, which is the major male hormone is testosterone. Female assigned at birth people have testosterone in their body, but just not at the high of level as cisgender men. So I can't imagine what that feels like going through puberty now, where you know that they have the science out there and the capability for your parents to put you on hormones, and your body is doing the opposite of you would like it to do. Now, I'm not judging parents for not doing it, because I think that's it's complicated, but I'm just saying from the perspective of a teenager. So for me, um, I think that I take a lot of extra care for my mental health, and I really prioritize going to cognitive behavioral therapy, because if I just let society tell me how to feel about myself, then I would not be where I am now. So I would be somewhere like under a rock or something. So yeah, I do think that it's really, mental health is a critical conversation, especially when we're talking about, transitioning socially and medically for youth. So
And especially when our society, unfortunately, is so far behind in terms of our support. We saw earlier this week or last week that Arkansas actually banned access to certain health resources um, for transgender youth. And
yeah.
an experience like that, on top of everything else that you are dealing with in terms of your identity, is huge. So, along those lines, thinking about what inclusive spaces look like, what do you think that would look like at the school level and even at the community level? What is an inclusive space for transgender and gender nonconforming and non-binary youth look like?
I really feel like, I'll say as a Nigerian, I think it takes a village. It really does, because in general, when you're raising youth, um, and you're building them up, you want to focus on different aspects of their development. And I don't think that one type of teacher or one type of mentor can cover all of that. So, for example, having support in the home, I think the most basic thing that you can do for a transgender person is to respect their pronouns. And everybody's different, so we have what we call dead names. So if, say for example, I'm female outside of birth, say my name was Susie, my mom named me Susie, um, and Susie is attached to this identity that I don't see myself as, and that's not who I am. So every time you call me Susie, you're basically disrespecting me. Um, Now, Fumilayo is actually typically a female name. I just kept my name, but that's not very typical for a transgender person to keep their name, from what I know. But I think that across the board, respecting people's pronouns and calling them by their name, like, I think that it's really critical for us to think about the ways in which we accommodate cisgender people and heterosexual people when it comes to name changes. Like, for example, if a woman gets married, now she's the Mrs. You didn't care about her last name. You don't care about her last name before anymore. Now she has a new last name. You're fine with that. But if I say my first name that I go by is Bill or something, now it's such a struggle when we're calling people Chuck and all kind, like we're calling people Chip. And I'm good with the nicknames, but it just is kind of like, we can adjust. Also, when we're going by, non-binary people, they, them. We know how to say they, them when we're, referring to one person during gossip. I mean, come on. So it's like we have to really be real about ourselves and say, is this harder than what we're already doing, the accommodations that we're already making for others? Or is this a mental block that we're having because we inherently think that this is extra work? So I think that, for example, me as turning 30 this year, transgender man, I feel like it's also my responsibility to serve youth who are going through things I went through before, maybe even experiencing things or having knowledge and terminology and all kinds of things that I'm archaic on. I just don't know. So I think that it's important for people within the community to reach out. I think it's important for families to understand that your child is not an extension of you. Your child is their own person. And, I think that, say, for example, Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade are doing, like Dwayne Wade really said, I'm doing the best I can do. I don't understand everything, but I'm doing the best I can do. And I think that's a good way to go about it, is to understand that your child is their own person. Um, Now with the schools, it's really hard with the schools. I feel like, especially when we're talking about middle school and high school, because a lot of, like, just briefly working in a high school, I know there's a lot of constraints that um, educators have because of policies. And you have some people who like, this is technically something that we can do, but I don't want to do it. So I think that just supporting students, if there's a, a GSA, a Gay Straight Alliance, just being present. If you're able to have, like, any type of conversations in class, it's hard, I know, because, like, sometimes parents want to get a teacher fired just for speaking up. So I think within the ability that you have, make it clear that you're an ally, and then go from there. But I think that pronoun usage, I mean, this is basic. Pronoun usage and just respecting a person's name is a good start.
Yeah. And I liked your comment earlier about how a lot of these things that we're asking people to accommodate really isn't that hard to do, because in our day to day lives, we make accommodations for other people every single day. It's just something that's so ingrained in us that we don't notice it. It's kind of second nature for us. So, in reality, being able to do these things, being able to, respect folks' wishes in the way that they want, shouldn't really be that hard for us. As you were mentioning, because we make accommodations every single day, and this is nothing new. um, Moving
Right.
on to our next question, you kind of answered a little bit of these things, but what tangible steps can schools, or maybe educators, those who work with youth, what can they take to help us get to more inclusive spaces? So I know you touched a little bit about some of the policy constraints that are in place at the moment. Are there any, like, mindset shifts or things that we could include in our curriculums? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that one thing that people can do, educators can do in particular, is to, this is in my opinion, this is an easy way, is to have certain months or days that we celebrate or that we discuss things. And that's a way to tie it in. So, you know, if you have Trans Visibility Day, you could say, okay, can you bring in an article and we can discuss that? You don't have to necessarily put your own personal um, you know, thoughts or feelings into it, but just that conversation around it, which can get tricky because you don't know what some students are going to say. But I do think that there's a way to go about it to actually have these healthy conversations. I think that having some type of LGBT organization on I just don't want to say campus, in school is important too, because that's a way for students to have a little bit of community and know, okay, we're having these events. That's the easy way for, say, the principal is an ally. They can just go and just see what are the students up to. And for a student to see that their principal is supporting them, that's a big deal. I do think I wouldn't necessarily put this on educators solely, but I do think that policy change is important, because I do think that there's a lot of, like, gray area when it comes to what transgender people can and can't do. Like, for example, there's no true um, law against me using the men's restroom, but it's like there are people who would say I should be in the women's restroom, which I think is ridiculous. Um, and so what I'm saying is like there needs to be policy that's laid down that kind of sink our teeth into protecting transgender people in specifically youth at school. So I think that sports, we're going to have to figure out the sports situation. I don't have all of the answers, but I do think that that needs to be solved. I think that it needs to be illegal, like it should be a legal protection for students, gender to be protected. They should be able to have that sense that safety. Um, and I think resources is just a big deal too. So maybe a teacher doesn't have maybe a teacher or assistant principal or counselor, maybe they don't have that knowledge of everything, but if there's opportunities to bring in organizations that work specifically with LGBT youth, I think that that's good, even if it's just open to identifying and questioning youth who have to sign up. I think there's no effort too big or too small to support students. So,
And at the core of it, we really are talking about just basic rights, basic things that students are afforded and should be afforded, right? So, for instance, in the situation with the bathroom, I think about Gavin Grimm and the incidents that he was having at his school, which led to him becoming, a major voice in this work, where he was being forced to use a completely different bathroom than any of his other peers. And small things like that schools can do that honestly do not take a whole lot of lift on the school itself to be able to provide that access. Like you mentioned, these are simple, small things that are already occurring for other people and really should be occurring for all people and all of our students.
right. And I think that it really goes down to how people perceive accommodations in general, because like allowing a student to go to the restroom safely shouldn't be treated like hard work on the school. Like I know that even people with physical disabilities, that's treated that way too. So it's more of a, this is giving me extra work type of thing. But it's like, that's, how can a student learn if they can't use the restroom safely, or if they're being called out of their name? It's basically like, if I could say the equivalent, when you're misgendering somebody, you're like cursing them out or something. Like, it may not seem that way to a person, but it's like you're just completely disrespecting them. So nobody, like, it's hard to focus when you're not being respected and you don't feel safe. So I think if we put that into the front of our minds versus, oh, I have to maybe walk the student somewhere, or I have to unlock the door, I have to do this and that. Yes, that is a little bit more, but the student has to do more too.
Mhm.
So, it's the way the infrastructure is gendered, and it's complicated, but we're trying to do the best we can do. So leaning the blame on the person who needs the accommodations, I don't think is healthy for anybody. So
Not at all. And we all have a collective responsibility to take care of each other. And so the responsibility should fall on all of us, most
for
definitely.
sure.
And even as you're talking, I was thinking about, like lower hanging fruit that's educators or just schools can do in terms of just representation. We always think about, or we tend to think about representation in terms of race and not in the other contexts. And so even, including the stories that students are reading in school, the books that they're reading, the type of literature, or in their math problems, like there's all different types of ways that this can be weaved in organically into our education system and into what our classrooms are doing already. And so taking the time to just shift your lens a little bit in what is inclusivity looking like within your school and even within your classroom.
I agree.
So Along those lines, we kind of had a little bit of conversation about this before, but how can we work together? When I say we, I'm talking about like our greater community here, including our schools, our families, our community organizations. How can we work together to erase the stigma that surrounds transgender and non-binary inclusivity?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with um, visibility. I think visibility. We need to be aware, and I'd say we as me too. I'm not I don't know everything. So it's like we need to be aware of the ups and the downs that transgender people and non-binary people are experiencing. So we need to talk about the, you know, epidemic of Black trans women being murdered and why we have to have these conversations about why Black trans women in particular are being murdered and the levels of, as they would say, they would call it misogynoir is basically misogyny against Black women, but there's trans misogynoir, violence against trans Black women. So we have to talk about the layers of race and class and gender identity and all of these things, um, the brutality, the harassment, the I would say just the demonizing of transgender people, like we're liars and all we care about is dating and that's our biggest issues. We want to just get married and we want to trick people and things like that. And um, we need to really have those conversations as to like why we're being painted as like aggressors when people are abusing us, even if you look at statistics. But I do think that this is one thing that is just as important is to celebrate transgender people. Um, art, and this is a great way to do it with students, like, art and expression, poetry. LGBT kids love poetry. I'll tell you that. um, anyways, um, yeah, art, poetry, I know a trans guy who he entered a bodybuilding contest with cisgender men, so he's kind of the underdog. Just so many levels of like, um, you know, success and achievement, and us making it despite the major narrative and exposure on films and TV. That's not just that expectation of like, oh, this person is, doing the same particular, they're the archetype, they're doing whatever, doing the same thing we expect them to do. Just us being having dynamic lives. So showing that. And I think that money is also something. So I do think that we need to put more money into supporting transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming kids to go to college. And I think that there needs to be more scholarships for those students of color, because what ends up happening is you have high performing, high privileged white trans people who are you have Black trans women who really don't have any resources, and now they're competing with each other, and a lot of times the people of color lose. So I do think that there needs to be scholarships, HBCUs, some like I go to Central, which is a big deal. We have an LGBTQA center, and it's a public university. So I think we may not be able to do a center at a high school or middle school, but I do think that pushing for colleges and organizations to open up funding for our trans and gender nonconforming youth, especially our youth of color and our youth with disabilities and our low income youth, um, and helping them get to college the way that we would treat pretty much any other marginalized identity, that will help a lot, because a lot of times there's a lot of burden on trans people to do um, all of this labor. Like, this is a lot of emotional labor, for a lot of people when we're talking about our experiences and things like that. Um, but you have big organizations who want to bring you in but don't want to pay you. So it's like, I feel like even for teenagers, if a teenager's coming up to a big event, they're doing a poetry presentation about their experience as a trans person, pay them. We get paid, like the average Black trans person gets paid about gets about makes about $10,000 a year. $10,000 a year. So what I'm saying is, like, yeah, I think the financial support is the emotional the emotional support is very important. But I think that access to mental health, extra access for us, extra access for us slash them, because I'm not youth, but extra access for the youth, extra, like, more opportunities for them to get certifications so they can work, um, get to college and things like that, and actually honoring their work, because I feel like there's a lot of research going on around transgender, surrounding transgender people, transgender youth, particularly when we're talking about, um, self harm and other things like that. But we're not, though the people who are some of the people who are researching are getting the clout and getting the research funding, and then a person who actually is living that life can't get it. So I feel like opportunity and community is a huge thing. And if there's a school, for example, that say that the school says, okay, if you're female sign of birth, you have to play on the women's team. You're a male sign of birth, you have to play on the men's team. Then there's not much that a teacher can do about that. But there can be some clubs that are open, competitive clubs that are open for all genders. That way, it can at least give you some type of like relief from that um, constraint that the students are feeling.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I want to end, Fumi, with just any words of encouragement that you have for any youth, or really just anyone out there who is going through this transitioning period or has gone through this transitioning period. What words of encouragement would you have for people?
I would say that the transition is never completely over. Mind you, um, we're all living life, so we all change and we grow, and um, we reflect, and we just have to we become a little different each day. Hopefully some people stay where they are, but what I would say is challenge yourself to be better, move at your own pace, be easy with yourself, like be gentle to yourself when you're having you may not be 100% every day, but do the best you can do. And just understand that there are people out there who are supportive of you, and there are going to be people who are against you because you're trans. But that doesn't mean that you're any less trans, and that doesn't mean that you're any less worthy, and that doesn't mean that the people who are there for you, their opinions are any less. So just try to focus on the people who are supportive, even if it's virtual, even if it's a community on Instagram or something like that. And really take time with yourself, because there's no it's so easy, I know, as a trans person, to see somebody else further in their transition and think that you're behind or, you know, but it's like, no, you are who you are. You're here for a reason. You're developing at your own pace. So just do the best you can do. And, there is community out here. And so just take the time to really figure out who's in your corner. And then once you're able to do that, I feel like, nothing can stop you.
All right. Well, thank you, Fumi, for having this conversation with me. I'm sure it was enlightening to our listeners. It was enlightening for myself. I want to encourage those. Today is International Transgender Day of Visibility. So I'd like to encourage those of you who are listening to have conversations with people around you. Take the time to learn more. We'll be sharing more resources for youth on our website and on our social media. So please feel free to take a look at those and share amongst yourselves. Again, thank you, Fumi, for spending this time with us. We really appreciate it. And
Thank you for having me.
of course, I hope that you take care and everyone else take care and be safe.
Yeah. Bye.